This morning we have a special guest who I'll be announcing in a moment, and we're going to have a nice, meaty conversation about what's going on in California. And we've spoken about it a number of times here in the past, where California passed this AB 5, Assembly Bill 5, into law. The California governor signed it into law. And so we're going to be digging into this. I'm joined by Catch founder and COO Kristen Tyrrell, based out of Boston. Thanks for joining us this morning, Kristen.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to just kind of give a little background on what's going on here in California, and then also get a little bit of background on Catch and what you guys are doing, why you certainly have an opinion on an insight on what's going on here. But so this Assembly Bill 5 was passed in September. And basically, the way I would describe it is really tightening the rules and classification, or you could say actually broadening what classifies as an actual employee, a W-2 employee of a business. And so what it's done is specifically around these gig-based what we call service marketplace businesses like an Uber, Lyft, DoorDash in particular, and others. The 1099 gig workers that they had, their producers, as we call them, in their marketplaces, would now be classified as employees. And that poses a number of difficulties and challenges for their business model to remain viable in the state of California. And so we're going to dig more into exactly, what challenges does that present? Why is that an issue? There's now a petition that Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash have put together to rally against this. A, did I so far describe that all correctly? And B, could you tell us a little bit more about Catch and what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. I think at the high level, that's exactly right. AB 5 is basically saying the default is that people are employees and that they are traditional W-2 workers unless you're part of a small number of exemptions that have been carved out to allow for people to have traditional contractor status or 1099s. So at Catch, what we do is we build a portable benefits platform for people who don't get benefits through work. So many of our users are 1099s, but we also see a fair number of W-2s. So I think it puts us in an interesting position because we're serving anyone who doesn't get traditional employer benefits. That's tax withholding, retirement, health insurance, really a lot of those things that traditionally come from HR. But there's a large and growing workforce that doesn't have access to an HR benefit system. And so they're responsible for setting that up and managing that themselves.
Interesting. So you could still be a W-2, but let's just say, hourly or minimum wage worker doesn't come with all the, say, full benefits package that one would traditionally expect. That could also be, a user that you cater to.
Yeah, so about 20% of our active users are full-time W-2 workers, but they don't receive benefits. That could be because they're set at a certain number of hours. It could be that they're at a small business. Small businesses don't have the same requirements for retirement and health insurance. About 20% of our users are also a W-2 and 1099 mix. So that sort of combination side hustler where they have a W-2 job, but they have some income as a contractor. So about 40% of our users earn at least one W-2 a year.
Interesting. Okay, and very interesting. So what we have going on here is we have Uber, Lyft, DoorDash. They've each committed $30 million each. So collectively $90 million bucks. And now they're trying to, California's already passed this. Technically, this is a law. It hasn't gone into effect yet, but technically it's been signed into law. And so what they're now trying to do is saying, well, we're going to go directly to the voter. We're going to put this ballot measure directly on, the voter's roster of things to check off or not check off. And so they're putting this $90 million. There's rumors that Instacart might also chip in, but we'll see. But they're putting this $90 million to try and educate voters in California about this alternative approach. And I have some of the bullets here that I can just recap. So they're saying that basically their gig workers would make at least 120% of the minimum wage. That's interesting. I don't really know how they would like actually come true on that, but okay. Reimbursements for gas and vehicle wear, healthcare subsidies for drivers who work 15 hours a week or more, different kinds of insurance that you can see here spelled out, and a cap on driver hours per day. It kind of looks like a different package, or it's like a package of benefits that they're saying, hey, we're going to provide these things to drivers or our gig workers, if it's an Instacart, for example. But we're trying to help the worker. Here's an alternative which doesn't now classify these workers as employees. Now, let's back up. When we were talking before we went on, what is your opinion of this AB5 bill and how it actually all sorted itself out?
So the one sentence overview is well-intentioned but poorly executed. And I think the fundamental misunderstanding, to expand on that a little bit, is to say that the government seems to imply that W-2 worker status equals worker protection. And I think that's just fundamentally an incorrect assumption. Ask anyone who works at Walmart, ask anyone who works at Dunkin' Donuts, like retail, food and bev. There are plenty of W-2 jobs that do not have a safety net. It's one of the reasons my company exists, right? So I think that the state sort of took this, what is it? When everything when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think it's kind of one of those situations where they used a very blunt object, which is W-2 classification, and said, well, we need worker protection for this group of people. The only thing we have to do that is to say, okay, you're a W-2 now. And I think that the unintended consequences of that, just to start with focusing on the platforms, the unintended consequences of that is that it will fundamentally change the structure of work for a lot of people who have opted into these roles for flexibility. It's not to say these workers don't need protection too, and that they should have to sacrifice everything for flexibility, but it is to say that forcing people to work certain hours, forcing people to work in certain locations or certain times will mean a lot of people who depend on this income will no longer be able to work these jobs. So I think this proposal that you just outlined is really interesting. It's actually the first time that I've heard the details about it, but I think it's really interesting to say, well, maybe there are more tools in our tool belt than just a hammer, and maybe there are other ways to have the outcome of protection without just saying that the status of W-2 is what we need to have.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit, right? Why, what is wrong with AB5 against the platforms? So, I mean, the reason why this would kind of make their business model untenable with something like this in effect is just from the economics of it. Well, now they have to, it's more expensive to deploy or use the same labor. Now they need to pay payroll taxes. They need to have workers' comp insurance. They need to have other kinds of standards in place that if you are having these people classified as employees, it's just going to, in general, raise the cost profile. All of those things come back to cost, which don't have the same cost structure when you're in 1099. So I think that's probably the biggest reason, selfishly, that the platforms are saying this just doesn't work. The other point that you were making is that for the actual drivers or producers, it actually does hurt their ability to actually work on the platform, because a large amount of these people are just doing this for incremental income, are just saying, hey, I'm home, I have some free time, let me pop on Uber and go make some, an extra $50 or whatever it may be. And so it removes, when you say flexibility, or it removes that flexibility, that incremental earning potential, where now it needs to be mandated by the platform. It actually doesn't really make it much of a platform anymore. So it's mandated by the company to say, you need to work these hours in these territories, and here's your shift, basically.
And the other problem you get into is if I'm Uber and I have to do all that, I can now say, well, you can't go work for Lyft at the same time. And you're taking away some of the flexibility of some of these workers to actually switch. If they say, hey, I don't want to work for Uber today, or Uber increased its rates, I'm going to go work for Lyft. If you're an employee, you lose a lot of that flexibility too, which is the downside. Yeah,
it's where they have 3 phones on and they're just constantly kind of optimizing. And basically they never miss a beat. If they're in the car, they're getting a ride pretty much most of the time. So, those, I think I think that all makes sense to me so far. What my gripe has been, and you obviously are much closer to this audience of people that need these kinds of benefit plans. But my thing has been the two biggest gripes of the gig economy worker is one, I have no say when the platform increases its take rate on me. So, hey, Uber was taking 20%. Now they take 22%. Or Lyft literally just did this for their earnings report last week, where they don't disclose GMV, the total amount of the rides. They only disclose their revenue, and their revenue is a function of take rate from the throughput. And so they can increase their revenue. Even if GMV stays the same, they can increase their revenue by just increasing the take rate, which is what they did. And the rider can't do anything, and you're just subject to them, especially now that we're seeing ride sharing become a more mature industry where there really are mainly just two players, Uber and Lyft. So that being the one big gripe. The second gripe is there's no recourse for if I get in trouble on the platform. If a driver reports me, or, if I have a low rating, or, the platform decrees that I have done something wrong and penalizes me. There is no third party independent review system in place. I'm lucky to even get someone on the phone to actually rebut that. And that could be, especially if I am a full-time driver, or that could be a very big negative impact to me, because I'm just trying to get someone to give me a fair shake. Those are the two biggest gripes, at least from what I've heard. What say you? Would you agree with that? Or are there other major drivers that disagree with that or counter that?
I think that aligns with a lot of things that we've seen. I think that the ability to be back on the platform, the ability to have sort of, I guess for lack of a better word, like negotiating power in the relationship is certainly what's missing. And I think that's where the good intent from AB5 came from, right? Like the good intent and the union sitting behind it was this idea of we do need to create some sort of collective power. But I think the thing is we're operating in a totally different world. And to say that the old models of unions and W-2 work status are the appropriate, collective bargaining that this new class of worker needs is, again, a little bit of a misfit. But I agree. I think that the collective bargaining is a big piece. We sort of see a different side of the problem, which is more from an individual level. People lack access to some sort of safety net. So one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that if you only earn 1099s, you actually don't qualify for unemployment insurance. And it makes sense because it's kind of hard to tell, well, are you not working by choice, or are you not working because you can't find work? And so all of these gig platforms in general have really blurred that line of like, what is unemployment, right? When we talk about the national unemployment rate right now, I honestly don't know what number we're talking about, because there are so many people, like you said, who do small amounts of incremental income from one place, and they do it sometimes. And so what do we even consider full employment right now? So the individual then is sort of lacking access to this protection, unemployment insurance, basic disability insurance, right? Some of those things. And I think we see that people are just very vulnerable. So even if they are working and everything's going okay, they're sort of one injury or one false step away from having nothing and having no means to sort of protect themselves.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, what I had thought that the ballot measure was going to be, maybe it was a little too audacious. And what had originally gotten me so excited about this, what we might have seen out of these platform companies, is the contemplation of a new labor class, a labor class specific to the platform model, these kind of gig economy jobs, which actually spans across the whole spectrum. We've spoken on the show about people that just create content for social media or for YouTube as a living, and you can earn an income.
Or individual sellers on an Etsy or an Amazon. Practically in a lot of the things you're talking about, Kristen, in terms of the lack of protection and safety net, applies to a lot of these, individual sellers or small businesses operating on these other platforms. Right. They also have the lack of recourse, and that lack of protections and consideration basically for this whole new class of what we would call platform producers, basically workers on this platform, isn't just an Uber and Lyft problem. I think it stands out there politically because that's the one where the W-2 versus 1099 classification is most stark, but it's a big problem beyond just that.
Right. So what my hope was that they were going to actually go all the way and say, hey, you know what? 1099 and W-2, they both don't work. We need to have a new labor class for the new economy. And I'd heard some rumors that was kind of on the docket. Ultimately, it didn't pan out that way. But have you seen that, or have you been involved in that conversation? What's your view on all of that?
Yeah, so people talk a lot about the third category of employment, right? Like, what's the third category? And I think that is also based on a false assumption, which is to say that the two categories right now are W-2 and 1099. 1099 is not a worker class; it's an income class. It's a way that you earn income. There's a bunch of different 1099s you can get. Some of it from lottery winnings, some of it from inheritance, right? Investors earn 1099s, like they often earn a 1099K, like for VCs and stuff. So 1099 is not a worker class. And the only worker class we have right now is W-2. So a lot of the arguments that I've heard against this, call it the third category, right? But this new class is that it might create what's called a race to the bottom. So the idea that basically whatever class you're in now, you'll sort of get bumped down. And if you were a W-2 who had all of these benefits, you'll become this new class, and they'll try and push new class to sort of full contractor role. And that's sort of where a lot of the big organizations, especially ones that tie into sort of traditional benefits. So we see a lot of the large players that sell 401ks and things like that take a pretty strong stance against a new category. I think there are obviously financial motivations related to that. But I think the concern of sort of saying, how do we ensure that not everyone just sort of slides backwards is legitimate. But I think, again, that's based on this idea that 1099 right now is a worker class, and it's not. So this is me personally not speaking for Catch, but like my personal opinion is that we do need a category that defines the way work is now, which is based on the idea of an individual earning income, right? Like you can earn income in lots of different ways, like you're saying, selling on an Etsy shop. And too often, I think we have built our business infrastructure to say, okay, well, then you should become an LLC. And our opinion is that like people are people, and not everyone should have to become a company in order to earn income and in order to have like access to quality products like SEP IRAs and things like that. So there's a gap between like okay, I'm an individual person earning income, and like, well, now I have to become a small business, like a small business of one, in order to be able to earn income however I want. So I agree there's a need for a new category. I don't know if I have a great answer for like exactly what the bullet points would be of what it looks like, but I think it's pretty clear that we're certainly missing some things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll see where all this nets out. But very interesting in terms of the role that Catch is playing in all of this. Seems like a great opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Kristen, and we hope to have you back and to follow the progress of the company.
Thank you so much.
That was great. I mean, I think this topic isn't going away. It's only getting started. And there's going to be a lot more on this as we see what happens in California. And oh, by the way, if California is successful, this is only going to trickle along to every other state. Right. As we've seen Facebook, where Facebook had the FTC settlement, and then all the states are now coming after Facebook. I mean, it's like
California
is whack-a-mole?
A huge part of their business, and it's often a leading indicator when it comes to stuff like this. So if, as you said, if California is successful, even if it's not, it's going to have ripple effects to a lot of other places.
Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.